Hi, this is something new. I wanted to do a devlog, the first devlog for our game Into the Fright. Into the Fright is a Metroidvania beat 'em up. I really like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Streets of Rage, and what I wanted to do was take the gameplay mechanics from a beat 'em up game and merge it with the exploration style of a Metroidvania. And we have a demo now that sort of gives the vibe, right? This is a long process that has got us to here. Technically, the build that is the demo is about a year old. I opened Godot. We made this in Godot. I opened up Godot for the first ever time on January 1st of this year. This is by no means the actual start of this game's existence. It started as an idea in, I think, 2019, and then it grew into many different things. It started out in Construct. I didn't want to learn code back in 2019, so we had like this top-down beat-em-up thing inside of Construct 3, Construct 2. I think it was Construct 2. I then was like, I should learn how to make games properly. That not to say that Construct can't make games properly, but it felt like I was cheating myself to not actually know how to code. So I loaded up Game Maker and I started in there and I just didn't gel with it. And I thought that I didn't enjoy coding. Turns out I actually just didn't particularly enjoy Game Maker too much. I know a lot of amazing games have been made with Game Maker, and I don't know, it just wasn't for me. I just didn't like it as much as I wanted to or needed to actually make a game. Funnily enough, when I went over to Unity, I had the same issue. Not the same issue in that I enjoyed coding when I was in Unity. I just hated Unity and didn't know that there was a world that was better than that until I arrived at this year in Godot. Now, this game has gone through many different iterations. It had a 3D stage. There was a stage where we were like, we could do this 3D. Terrible idea. There's two of us, right? I'm doing code and game design, and Matt is doing art, music, and also game design. So it's like he's creative lead and I'm technical lead, and together we have a lot of crossover, and video game exists because of that combination, I guess. I don't know. So aside from all of the previous builds and the 3D and the 2D and the back and forth, this year we were like, let's do this properly. Let's launch a demo. I think the original idea was to launch the whole game, but let's launch a demo on Halloween. That's our goal. So we set out to do that. We, over the course of the past, what would it be, 10 months? Yeah, over the past 10 months, we have worked on this game. We had a plan, we scaled it back, and then we had that plan, and then we scaled that back, and then that has become the demo. And I've learned a lot. I think over the course of a few videos, probably, I want to talk about how we got to where we're at. And I want to probably break this into multiple different sections. But for this is like an overview. This is a sort of step-by-step of what we did without going into any specifics. And then let's go into some specifics in some other videos. The first massive lesson that we have learned from doing this is scope and scaling. Like, the recommendation when you're making games for the first time is to start small. I think that we thought that we were. But I think that we thought that we were because we were comparing the game that we were going to make to like AAA size games. And it's like, yeah, we're not making an Assassin's Creed. We're not making a massive RPG. Like, my background is in dialogue. I worked on Baldur's Gate 3 and Metaphor ReFantazio and Black Myth Wukong. And like, my interpretation of sort of scale is coming from that. I know how long voiceover production lasts. I know how long like gameplay production lasts, and these are many years, and there's a lot of cogs turning. So our idea of this smaller version of that was with that in mind. Well, obviously this is smaller. This is a small game because it's not that. No. Turns out, actually, small production means really small. When they say you should start making a small game, they mean small. In that, compare yourself to the game that you want to make, right? So, Silk Song, fairly new game. That is a team of 3 people. I'm assuming they're outsourcing certain things, but for the most part, as far as I'm aware, it is a team of 3 people. Now, that is a game that is large. It is very complex. It has a lot of systems. It is very finely tuned. The artwork is plentiful and gorgeous. And that is not a small game. So compare the genre that you're making in and the team size that you're making in, and then still make something small with those restrictions in mind. There's 2 of us, there's 3 of them. We should be making something significantly smaller than what they're making. You know, we work full-time jobs. We can't, like if it was full-time, maybe. But even then, no, make something small. I think we made that mistake. And I think that's still a mistake because the demo that we've made is probably the size of a game that we should have made. And that's what we're correcting moving from this demo. We're going to go and do some small things before we come back to finishing this in its full big scale. But biggest lesson we learned, scope. Everything takes longer than you think it's going to. And you should start small even with that in mind. So with that, our demo is like 20 minutes to 40 minutes of gameplay. Depends on how good you are, depends on how quick you solve or don't solve the puzzle that we've included. It is a series of beat 'em up fights and then a loop back into a puzzle. And if you solve the puzzle, you get a key. If you get the key, you get to a boss fight, complete the boss fight, and that's the end of the demo. That is sort of the gameplay loop that we're aiming for the full game. There's going to be a lot more backtracking, a lot more sort of crossover between areas, but as a single isolated area, this gives every indication of what the full game would be. That idea of scope has to be applied to this sort of area, right? Like if the full game is going to be 4 of these areas or 5 of these areas or 10 of these areas, how long does it take to make one of them? It took us 10 months. And even then, it was a scaled back version of this area. The boss that's at the end of this current demo was a mini boss. We were going to have another boss that you had to like navigate to after that, and so on and so on. It was going to be much, much bigger. And this that we've made now, this 20 to 40 minutes is, you know, it took 10 months. And the last few months were hard. We put a lot of time in outside of work. The last 2 weeks, I did 2 full-time work weeks at my job and then did another full week of work within those 2 weeks. Like, it's hard work. And in theory, to keep that up for 4 rooms would be, you know, 40 months with that sort of crunch period at the end of each. And that's large, that's big. That is something that I think if we were starting from scratch with this knowledge, which I'm hoping to sort of impose onto anyone who wants to hear it, that's the biggest lesson that we learn, and the takeaway that I'm taking into the next sort of little mini games that we're going to be building is even the small game ain't actually that small. So one of the main focuses that we had for this game, and this sort of technique is something we're going to be taking forward into the other games, is we want to sort of pick what do we want to hone in on, what are the skills we want to learn, what are the things that we want to show off in this game. Many people would call these like the core pillars of the game. Now obviously they're not always about learning and developing new skills, but like for us that is. And something that we wanted to hone in on with Into the Fright is that we wanted to like give exploration a big sort of spotlight. This is something that beat 'em up games don't normally do. Beat 'em up games are very linear. You start the level, you go to the right, you end the level. Do that 10 to 15 times, that's the end of the game. Ta-da! We didn't want that. We wanted it to be a bit more sort of, we're going to give you a world to explore. We wanted this to be something that you are, you know, going down this path and coming back and exploring the thing and solving the puzzle, and I'll come back to that later, and so on and so on. Sort of how you would play a Hollow Knight, a Silksong, a Guacamelee, right? Like, we wanted this to be something that you can sort of come back to. And there's a lot of Metroidvanias that are more linear in that you have to unlock an item to get to the next thing, unlock an item to get to the next thing. And we wanted to do it more in that Hollow Knight style, where there is always multiple ways in, there's different ways to sort of cheat around certain things. It's not linear, but a spider web. It's literally just a spider web that you can interact with however you want. Another core pillar was, for me, gameplay feel. I want this to feel like a really good beat 'em up game. I went back and played some of the old Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle games and felt like this doesn't hit the way that I remember it hitting, because I've now got so used to other games that feel good. And that was sort of a good learning curve for me, is like, okay, what beat 'em up games do I want to actually pull from? And Streets of Rage 4 was definitely one of those, though that feels really good to do the combat. And then I ended up actually pulling a lot from Hades. Now, I've put a lot of hours into Hades, a lot of hours into Hades 1, and then a lot of hours into Hades 2 early access, and now into the main game now that it's out. And the way that that feels to do the sort of more hacky slashy, like button mashing combat was something that I wanted to take. So the combat for Riley, one of our two main characters, is very much inspired by that gameplay style that Hades has of like, if you want to just mash buttons and like try and do like powerful shit by just like going at it, that is a valid way of doing this. And that's where like our dodge came from. There's a specific feel to the way that the dodge works in Hades, and I was like, I'm stealing that, and now both of our characters do it. Because it feels good, and again, one of the core pillars. Art style was definitely something that we have played around with a lot of the different versions, and when we arrived in Godot and we locked in exactly how this game was going to feel, we had solidified that this had to be pixel art. That feels obvious now. We have one artist that needs to make art for an entire video game. Pixel art should have been of course that's the route that we should go down, but it took us many years to get there. Art is hard and takes a lot of time, and if it's one person making art for an entire video game, like even the idea of going, it's okay, I can make like one good sprite in an hour or so. Cool. How does that scale when you're doing 50 sprites for a single character, and then you have 20 characters, and then you have all the backgrounds and you have all the props and all these things? It's like that scales terribly, right? There is a big issue with scalability when it comes to art when you're working with a really, really small team, as we are. I am not an artist. I can only contribute to art up to a certain degree, which means it was entirely left on Matt to do. Now that we've had 10 months of doing this full development cycle, we now have a much better place to come from. We have a better way of structuring our planning and prep, and we know roughly how long things take, and moving into other games, we're going to be much, much better at scoping in relation to art. But that was a long learning curve. That would from 2019 till now, like that was the big thing that every single time that we have iterated on art, we have learned and improved. And we're now at the point that, like, for me, as the outsider, as someone who doesn't know art very well, like, I'm so happy. It looks great. The results that we're getting in terms of bringing that into engine and then using 2D lighting, that is something that I can contribute to, and like that sort of, as far as my art input has gone, is the lighting within our game. I am so happy with it, and I think that is one of the things that I'm most proud of that we've done in this development cycle. Is we started out this year with a good idea of how this was gonna look and feel, and then by Halloween, when we released the demo, we, for me, nailed it. The exact vibe we wanted to hit, we hit. I will not take up any more of your time. I want to put out some more videos and talk about things more in depth, whether we talk about art or gameplay or how certain systems work. I don't know. If any of you want to go play the demo and tell me what you think, that would be amazing. Be critical if you want. Be kind, but, be critical. If you want to give us a lot of feedback because you're an aficionado of beat-em-ups or Metroidvanias, or you just like games and want to give it a go, I'm all ears. So, yeah, thank you for watching this video. If you want to check out the demo, I will link it in the description. If you don't and just care about devloggy stuff, cool. Hi, welcome. I will not ignore you. Right, cool. Bye.